Hello, I'm Alastair Hudson, and this is an introduction to the Securities Law course. I really enjoy this course, the Securities Law course. What this course aims to do is to provide you with a map through the thicket. There's a thicket of dense regulation here. This is an immensely practical course. It's a huge part of corporate law practice, particularly in the City of London, but around the world. Looking at how the largest companies access capital markets, how they access funding for their businesses. So beyond ordinary borrowing, loans and that sort of thing, we're looking at how shares are issued, how bonds are issued, how certain types of securities like securitized derivatives, warrants and so forth are issued as well. Very complex regulation governing all of this. I say very complex, it seems like a forbidding castle from the outside. However, what we do on this course is to provide you with a map as to how to get through all that regulation to understand how it all fits together. Students have done really very well on this course. It's impossible for me to know whether or not this is because some of these students are in practice themselves, but really everyone that's come onto this course has done very well on it. I get a sense that they really enjoyed it. This course, at this time, speaking in 2013, has evolved in the wake of the financial crisis. Even though securities regulation itself has yet to change deeply in relation to that crisis, there's yet to be a big reaction as there has been in other markets in relation to the financial crisis. Securities regulation, in terms of the regulatory practice and the way in which regulators are going about their business, has changed. And so a big part of what we're doing is looking at these regulations. How do they function? If you were in practice, what sort of things would you be doing? Where would the liabilities lie? How would you put a prospectus together and so on and so forth? And also, how are the regulators starting to deal differently? Where is the policy going to go in the future, for example, in the European Union, which will therefore drive securities regulation in the UK? So this is a course that I must say I enjoy enormously. The textbook on which this course is based is my book, The Law of Finance, which has several chapters looking at securities regulation. I also write a book for practitioners, which is a full 1,000 pages on called Securities Law, which governs securities regulation across the EU, focusing primarily then on how those regulations are implemented in the UK. It also looks at all the substantive law, the potential liabilities of common law, everything else. So what you're getting in this course is, I hope, I certainly feel, a very interesting analysis of what are the policy ideas, how should we react to the financial crisis, but an immensely practical education in how this works in practice and how you could benefit from that in your own legal practice now or in the future. So that legal practice will involve, for example, offering securities. And we're really thinking about the largest public companies. But this is, for our purposes, across the European Union, because the policy really is to try and develop a single market for the entire EU. And in the wake of the financial crisis, the policy has shifted from individual member states being allowed to create their own specific regulatory rule books that implement the high-level principles that are in the EU directives. And instead, we're looking for the future to have a single rule book for the entire EU. Now, what's interesting studying that in the UK is that the London markets have always wanted to have their regulations be more stringent than those EU minimums. Why? Because it's said to attract investors. Investors are more likely to be confident investing in London than in other financial markets because they'll know that those regulations are more stringent than elsewhere and therefore they'll feel better protected. So this change in policy towards having a single rule book for the EU is going to be interesting, and to what extent will the UK still be able to gold plate, as the expression has it, their own regulations to make them different from other people's. But the beating heart of securities regulation is about the provision of information. It'd be very easy to think that what we're going to study here is going to be how we protect consumers, how we ensure that no one ever suffers a loss and everyone makes money. It's not how this works. This is all about free markets. And so what's really going on is a regulatory scheme in which we insist that particular types of, quote, necessary information are provided to the investing public. And the investing public will range from the large institutional investors at one end of the spectrum right the way through to ordinary members of the public like you and I trying to invest some of our savings in the securities markets as well. And across the EU, we're very keen to encourage smaller investors, because if they bring their money in the aggregate, that means there will be much more capital available. And the beautiful metaphor that's used in the EU publications is they want there to be deep liquid pools of capital. Such a lovely expression, deep liquid pools. So if more and more investors, large and small, are encouraged to come to these markets, then there will be deep liquid pools of capital available to those companies to issue shares, to issue bonds, and so on and so forth. Now don't worry, this course doesn't require you to have lots of knowledge about how financial markets work. Instead, the course itself will explain those things to you. So what a bond is, how a share functions, what a securitized derivative is, what a warrant is, all those sorts of things will be explained in the course itself. So you don't have to come with any prerequisite knowledge. And that's why my book, The Law of Finance, is the basis for this course, precisely because it explains all of those terms, has a useful glossary. There are a large number of podcasts on my own website to support that book, and therefore will help you with this course, but ranging from full lectures right the way through to very short individual podcasts to summarise some of the key ideas, little bits of video me explaining on whiteboards how some of those terms work. So you have a huge amount of that kind of support available to you. And what's also interesting then for you is how you could develop your own future ideas about where you want your own legal practice to go. Because what you're going to learn is how is information provided to those investors. Having said that's the thesis that underpins securities regulation, that's its philosophy. We then have to look at, well, how is that information provided? Well, it's provided through the prospectus directive, the fact that companies that are issuing securities have to prepare prospectuses. We'll look at what are the contents of those prospectuses, who are the people that will be responsible if anything goes wrong after the event. It's not just the issuing company, lots of other people too. We'll look at the transparency obligations that require issuers of securities to make it plain. Who's really running this company in the background? You know, are there people who are controlling some of the shareholders if shares are held through trusts or front companies or whatever else? Who's really in the background? So it's all about providing that information so that all investors have access to the same information. How does that make it a free market? We make sure everyone's got the same information, and then it's entirely up to them what decision they make. No one's going to protect them from making a bad decision. We're just going to protect them from being fleeced or from having their ignorance taken advantage of. That's what securities regulation is all about. You can hear the sirens going on outside. You know, the police are coming. If you breach the regulations, then that's what happens next. So that's a big part of what we're looking at in financial regulation. We're looking at context. It's very, very real. It's as real as a wailing police siren. I think you're going to love this course as much as I do.